Revenge films.
My husband Kevin and I were living together without any children at the time. My family lived far away from my hometown, so it was difficult to see them often. I would often go see them once a year if I was lucky, but then one day I received a phone call from my parents. They said that my father wasn't feeling well and his health hadn't been great. And then a few years later, I received a call that he collapsed. Although my parents lived very far away, they had always been very supportive of my husband and I. My father put down the payment for our house when we first built it, and when my husband wanted to start his own business, my father was the first to loan him a large portion of the initial investment. Because my husband and I had both been looking after, well, my father, we both decided to fly back to my hometown and see him. Although Kevin and I didn't have any children yet, we did have a dog, but unfortunately my mom back home was allergic to dogs, and we weren't able to bring him with us. We called a couple pet hotels in the area. In bad luck, they were full at the time period. We thought about hiring a pet sitter, but that would mean that we would have to be staying at home, and my husband said that he didn't really want to rely on a stranger in our house. However, there was one pet sitter that we asked for one time and to look after the dog, and our dog was quite used to her already. She offered a service that didn't involve staying at our house, but she would come look after a dog for our daily walks, and clean the doggy toilet, and make sure that the dog was being fed. We could simply request the same person that usually comes to take care of our dog, and we liked her. She was a kind woman who had a certification for the training of police dogs, and so she was somebody that we could trust with our dog. It wasn't the first time that she'd been looking after a dog, and because it was an emergency, I felt like we had no other choice, but my husband still refused that service, and instead, he started saying that he wanted to ask his younger sister. At the time, my sister-in-law was divorced already, but she was still looking for a job, and she probably didn't have any money, so my guess was that Kevin was trying to give her a little bit of pocket money. However, there was one last thing I wanted to do. The reason was because I couldn't trust my sister-in-law at all. Once in the apartment building that we used to live in before, my sister-in-law came over to visit us. On that day, for a couple of hours, I had left my full wallet out on the kitchen countertop. But then my sister-in-law had gone home for visiting us, and I noticed that $100 bills were missing from my wallet. When I spoke to my husband about this, he insisted that I must be my own misunderstanding, and he refused to believe me. But there was no doubt that day before, in the morning, I'd taken out $300 from the bank and even had a receipt from the ATM transaction. And the 2 hours between when my sister-in-law had come over and when she left, $200 was missing. Without a concrete proof that it was her, there was nothing I could do. But after the incident, there was no way that I could trust her anymore. That being said, Kevin insisted that he didn't want to hire a pet sitter and refused to budge. We were running out of time to figure it out, so I felt like I had no choice but to agree to let his little sister take care of our dog. But that was when I decided to cover my tracks this time. We had a drawer with an emergency cash of $1,000, as well as gift cards of $700 stored away. I was doing Japanese calligraphy as a hobby, so I took one of the very delicate pieces of Japanese paper and I put it in a drawer so as soon as the door would open, the paper would rip. Of course, I didn't tell my husband about this. A couple of days later, after we visited my father, we came back home. As soon as we got into the living room, I told my husband about the little trap that I had set up before we left. I also reminded him how, just before we left the house, we told his little sister not to enter our storage room under any circumstances, and I said that I was going to check on that now, so I wanted him to come with me. I was almost certain that my sister-in-law definitely stole from us, and then, when the two of us would go check that particular drawer, just as expected, the delicate paper was ripped. Where there used to be $1,000 in cash, it was only $200, and the gift cards were completely gone. The next day, my sister-in-law came over to return the keys to us. My husband confronted her. Once he cornered her with the evidence, she also admitted to stealing the previous time. But then, she got angry at us. "I can't believe you would set up a trap like this! How evil of you!" And she started throwing a tantrum. And then when my sister-in-law went home that day, suddenly my husband turned to me with cold eyes.
I can't forgive my sister for what she did, but at the same time, it gives me chills to think that you didn't trust your own family, and you would set up such an elaborate trap against her.
When he said that, I was shocked. I replied, if this was going to happen 2 times like this, I can't help but think what was going to continue to happen more than 2 times. And the only reason why I did it this time is because you refused to believe me, you know. Why can't you understand that if you just believed me back then and taken care of it, I never would have had to do this? In the same way that you couldn't trust the pet sitter, you refused to hire them, I don't trust your sister. And that's why I don't want her to stay at our house while you're away. Before you come at me, isn't there something else you want to say? However, Kevin refused to see it in that way. Instead of his sister, who had already stolen from us 2 times, he seemed to be less forgiving of me, who set up a secret trap in order to expose her. He said that I started this, and in the end, he didn't want to give an apology and instead was furious with me. After that, I definitely didn't want to have any contact with my sister-in-law, who could blatantly steal from us. And then, I couldn't trust my husband anymore, who let that stealing sister do whatever she wanted and instead come after me. And so we got a divorce. When we got a divorce, I also inherited my ex-husband's debt from the father and tried to collect the loan payments. Around that time, I had also heard from Kevin that his business wasn't going well, but that didn't mean he could get out of the payments, and he kept avoiding it. When the payment was delayed for 1 month, and after 2 months, I decided to contact him, but his response was shocking. Apparently, my ex-husband found out that through some mutual friends and relatives that my father had passed away, and apparently he thought that now that my father passed, he didn't have any responsibilities to pay back the loan anymore. Of course, that would never be the case, and so I told him that I inherited the responsibility for the loan and told him that he needed to return it. But then Kevin exploded and he said that he wasn't going to pay what he doesn't have to, and declared that he wasn't going to pay back the loan. My ex-husband was in debt about $10,000 to my father, but that must mean that his business is going so poorly that he couldn't even pay that amount. Although my ex-husband and I didn't exactly separate on good terms, given the difficulty of the business climate, if he had just at least apologized and given me a reason for the delayed payment, then perhaps I would have given him some more thought. However, instead, Kevin thought that just because my father passed away, he didn't have to pay the payments anymore. That angered me. That's why I told my ex-husband that if he wasn't going to return the money, then I was going to take appropriate measures to handle it. But then Kevin's response was,
In that case, I'm going to claim bankruptcy. If I do that, then I don't have to pay back any loans anymore. Take that!
He raised his voice at me. If my husband claimed bankruptcy for his company, he seemed happy that he was going to be relieved from all the debt. But it seems that he didn't know the demerits that it would come with this decision. Otherwise, if that meant that you would easily be free of your debt, then anybody would choose that route of bankruptcy easily. In the past, I had a friend who had become a guarantor of a business once, and that amount was so large that she had to claim bankruptcy in tears. So I know just how difficult that decision is. That's why, instead of saying anything back, I chose to remain silent. And then, right after that, apparently my ex-husband really did begin the steps to bankruptcy, and he sent me a horrible message.
And with this, my debt to you is gone. 0! Take that!
I chose not to reply this time, but not long after that, I asked a mutual friend of ours how my ex-husband is doing these days. He may have been freed of the debt, and he had to pay us back, but his car was confiscated, and all of the cards and loans that he had been able to use were now completely inaccessible to him. On top of that, his house was also taken away from him. And she said that he had to move into a tiny rundown apartment. My ex-husband seemed to think that if he could just make his loans disappear, that he would be able to start back up in no time. And that's why he was up on his high horse. But now that he was faced with the reality, I heard he's gone completely pale. And then I also found out that he was in quite a lot of debt from his friends. But he thought that once he claimed bankruptcy, he'd be easily able to get back on his feet, which clearly wasn't the case. So he hasn't returned any of those debts as well. Now that he was put on the blacklist and he wasn't able to take any loans from banks from his friends, I heard that he tried calling everybody to borrow money, but not one person agreed. If anything, I heard that they all cut off ties with him, but he did this all to himself. For the record, I also heard another piece of interesting information from a mutual friend. I can't say I was very surprised to hear this. My former sister-in-law was also stealing from her friends' houses, and eventually she was caught, and one of them reported her to the police, and she was arrested. She became the talk of the town, fired from her job, and she has nowhere else to go anymore. Well, there's no way that a company would want to keep a convicted criminal in their office, especially not a thief. You never know what she might steal or the damage that she might cause. And not only that, but I heard that she's trying to find a new job. But because everybody already knew about her reputation, she hadn't been able to pass a single interview. It wasn't a big city, so word got around really fast and she was left all alone. And I'm sure businesses talk to each other about hiring dangerous people because it would be bad for all related businesses if any of them were to be a victim of theft or other potential damages. When my sister-in-law was stealing from me, because it was between family members, the police wouldn't step in and ask us to settle it between family, so there wasn't much I could do at the time. However, when it comes to unrelated friends, that's a different story. And my husband as well, even though my father was on good terms and would take such good care of him in so many ways, when my father passed away, he didn't even have a word of condolence to offer. Even if I already had been divorced, he was only celebrating the fact that he wouldn't have to pay back the loan anymore. And so, seeing karma get both of them together like this made me feel a lot better. I'm sure that I won't ever have to speak or see my sister-in-law ever again, but I'm truly relieved from the bottom of my heart that I got a divorce from him when I did.
How was today's video? If you enjoyed it, please subscribe, like, and leave a comment. Stay tuned for more.